Hey y'all, flip-top carts have been around for a while, but I'm looking to improve on the general design in two ways with this build: longevity and styling. The plywood-only cart builds I see work well when they're built, but I'm not convinced they really will last that long when being used and moved around a shop constantly. And I'm also a stickler for having no exposed fasteners or plywood sides, even on my shop furniture. So for this build, we're going to use 2x4s for the frame and plywood for support and surfaces. We are going to incorporate a version of mortise and tenon joinery, way overkill for a shop project, but I want to continue to practice this method, and shop furniture is perfect for that. Speaking of mortise and tenon, after cutting to length all the pieces I need for the two side structures, I cut out a mortise slot down one side of the boards, and that's going to double as both a slot for a plywood insert, but also where the tenons are going to go to connect all the boards together. To cut the tenons, I built this jig for a prior project that works on my table saw. Clamp on the board, set the blade height to the right height, and then run the piece back and forth until the tenon is the right size. After cleaning up the joints, you can see how these two will fit together. Now I'm going to use dowels to lock in my joints rather than fasteners. To do this, I drilled the hole for the dowel through the mortise board, then inserted the tenon and marked its location with a fastener bit. I made these blocks to help me get the right spacing for the bottom section. I found for some of these projects it's easier just to cut a piece of scrap wood and make the size you need rather than always relying on measurements to try and get it right. I then marked the hole location on the tenon about 1/16 of an inch closer to the joint than the original mark. That way when I insert the dowel, it'll act like a clamp and close the joint as tight as possible. After cutting the plywood insert, I went ahead and chamfered all the edges to make assembly easier, and a rough assembly showed it was all fitting great. These dowels did pull in these joints nice and tight. After using some excess dowel to fill in some mistakes, these side pieces were ready to go. Now for how the two side structures are going to attach to each other, there are these three cross pieces that are going to create the drawer surround frame that'll be towards the bottom of the cabinet. And so all of these cross pieces need 1/2-inch grooves or corners cut off them so that the plywood can sit in it. The shelf on top of the drawer surround also needs side supports, so I cut down some small pieces and attached them straight to the sideboards. Then built the back of the drawer surround with glue and brad nails. Before assembling, the last thing we need to build is the actual flip top itself. For this, I built the frame in the same manner. The plywood sits on the small shelf on the front and back and won't show once it's all put together. Then a small piece is attached to each side with a hole drilled through it to accept that rotating bar later that makes the actual flip top action happen. Now I know exactly what machines I want to put on this cart. So what I did was I put the machines in the half-built assembly, then marked out where the supports are needed to attach them to this cart. An important thing to remember when doing this is have the machines face different directions when getting these measurements, because when they get attached to the final assembly on opposite sides, they'll actually end up facing the same direction when they rotate, so you can always have the front facing the same side we're putting the drawer on. After marking where the supports need to be and transferring those marks to the side of the sideboard for future reference, I glued in those boards and then attached the top with glue and brad nails. What was supposed to be the last step before assembly was to cut out the slots for the locking mechanism on all four corners of the side structures. To do this, I drilled a hole, and then I used my handsaw and chisel to remove the excess material. Next, I cut the hole for the rotating bar, only about 1.1 inch deep, not all the way through, so that the bar will be trapped inside between the two side assemblies once put together, and it will have a nice clean appearance on the outside. And then I realized I forgot to cut out where the hardware goes on the flip top before it was assembled. The first thing we need to do is drill the hole for the mounting hardware that goes through the boards. This includes an inset section for the bolt head and the nut on each side, then a through hole for the actual bolt to go through. Then a slot that matches the ones we put on the side structures has to be cut into it so that the eye bolt can sit in there and rotate. I went ahead and did this with a drill, a saw, and a chisel, and it worked out pretty well. I fixed this step in the plans available on my website, making sure to get this done before assembly. You can get this plan for free for a limited time on my website. Link is below. I first saw this locking concept on a Fix This Build That build, and I really love how it solidifies the structure. 99% of this time, all the corners of this are going to be locked, and it really tightens it up. Now that we have all our pieces, we are ready to assemble. On one side, I mounted the 3 drawer surround boards with pocket holes and glue, added the flip top and the bar, then set the second side on top. After gluing and pocket holing the other side together, I cut out the shelf for the top of the drawer surround, cut out the corners, and then placed it with glue and brad nails to complete the frame assembly. I built the drawer using pocket holes and an inset drawer bottom. Screwing into the bottom instead of gluing in case I ever need to change this out at some point. I then mounted it on the frame, attached the drawer face by using spacers, and screwing it into the frame where the handle mounts will be. I didn't have any playing cards handy, so I just used what I had to be able to get center spacing for this board. Then added more screws from the inside to hold it secure. I did a light sanding and a few coats of a water-based poly on it to really help clean up in the future. Then I assembled the corner locking hardware, making sure all corners are lined up. Now it's time to mount the tools. I had my notes on where the braces were and checked it against the marks on the side of the flip top, then used these lag bolt replacement screws with washers on them to mount them to the inner braces. Oops. After completing that for both sides, I made some cord loops to help keep the cord secure during flipping. I also made a handle for the drawer in the same style as the rest of my shop furniture, and then loaded up that drawer with all the odds and ends for both these machines that I need to keep handy. And lastly, I added casters to this bench. I've had the normal rolling locking casters on most of my other builds, and it's not as great as I'd hoped so. So I tried these different kind that actually drop the cart onto the ground when it's not moving to help improve stability. We'll see how they perform before I look to put it on any of my other furniture. And with that, this build is done. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. You can get a copy of this project plan on my website, and I will see you on the next project. Thanks.